So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, at this point in the preseason, the Detroit Lions have gone through 2 weeks of OTAs and a week of mandatory minicamp. We've gotten a good first look at what the 2023 rookie class is going to look like for the Detroit Lions this season. And although we've talked about some players throughout the process, though we've talked about some of the standout players, we've talked about some of the flashy skill position players throughout the process of OTAs and minicamps, we haven't really gotten a chance to talk about every rookie. Right? We haven't gotten a chance to talk about some UDFAs. We haven't got a chance to talk about even some of the highly drafted players from this most recent draft class. So today, with OTAs pretty much in the books and mandatory minicamp officially finished, I wanted to take a look and give a rookie update. Kind of talk about what every single rookie member has been up to and where they are in the path of their development on the road to the 2023 NFL season. So with that being said, let's take a look at the rookie updates and see where the 2023 class is for the Detroit Lions heading into mandatory training camp as well as the NFL preseason. Now, I want to start off with Jamir Gibbs, a player that was highly drafted, a player that was a top 15 pick in the most recent class, and a pick that was very heavily criticized by the media, by the fan base, by division rivals, and pretty much everybody that has an opinion that they're willing to share was against this pick from the very beginning. And despite Jamir Gibbs having an ankle injury to start rookie minicamp, he has been everything the Detroit Lions had been looking for since drafting him at 12th overall. The speed is there, the explosiveness is there, the dynamic plays are there, and even though he did have a few drops early in minicamp and early in OTAs, he has turned that around and since been a dynamic deep threat for the Detroit Lions and been not only a great running back prospect, but a phenomenal receiving prospect as well. Dan Campbell came out yesterday and said that by the midseason, nobody's going to be talking about Jamir Gibbs as a running back. They're going to be talking about Jamir Gibbs in the same way that they talk about Christian McCaffrey, in the same way that they talk about Austin Eckler, a true receiving threat that could have 1,000 receiving yards on the season, as well as 1,000 rushing yards on the ground. Now, Jamir Gibbs is one of the few rookies to actually be seeing first-team reps already, and it's due to his phenomenal receiving ability and his ability to get the ball in open space and take the football the distance, as well as just make big plays in big moments and really be the dynamic weapon on offense that the Detroit Lions have been missing for a very, very long time. Now, moving on to the second first-round pick from this draft class, Jack Campbell is a player that has been very quiet throughout OTAs and training camps, a player that has kind of been in the background, a player that doesn't get very many stories written about him, a player that doesn't have very much media hype at all, despite being a fellow top 20 pick and despite being a very good player, arguably a top 20 player from this draft class from a talent perspective. And that's leading a lot of people to the wrong conclusion, right? It's leading a lot of people to say, oh, he's not being talked about in minicamp. Oh, he's not going to be a good player. Oh, he has all the signs of being a bust. He's not a fast linebacker. He's not being talked about. And it's leading a lot of people to false conclusions. However, Jack Campbell is actually having a very good OTAs and in fact is having a very strong minicamp of his own. His physicality and knowledge are being presented every single day at every single practice, and he has very high expectations for himself as a linebacker, as do the Detroit Lions have for him as a leader and captain on the defense. Now, I'm not going to tell you that he's taken off immediately. I'm not going to tell you that he's been a perfect player at OTAs and training camp. He has had some learning pains. He has had some growing pains, right? He has had some situations where he's lost reps and learned from them and been very visibly frustrated on the field, but that does not mean that he is a bad player, right? He's come out and Dan Campbell's talked about this in his interviews, talking about how Jack Campbell is very much where they want him to be right now, right? From a physical aspect, from a mental aspect, from a knowledge aspect, he is exactly where they want him to be. Even if Jack Campbell's frustrated at himself for not being perfect right away, the Lions have a path for him. They have a development curve for him in mind, and if he is on track with that development curve, if not ahead of schedule from where the Detroit Lions wanted him to be. Now, yes, the game is a little bit faster at the NFL level. Yes, Jack Campbell has missed a couple of assignments and he has not quite gotten to the spot when he needs to get there, but he is improving every single day and he is continuing to get better at every single practice. So despite him not necessarily being the flashiest player, despite him not necessarily having the Jamir Gibbs type storylines around him, make no mistake, Jack Campbell is a very good football player and is going to continue to play very good football throughout minicamp, throughout training camp, and throughout the preseason. And by the time Jack Campbell gets on the field, these allegations of him being a bust, the allegations of him being overdrafted, I think are going to go away very, very quickly. Now, sticking with the Iowa products, we're going to take a look at Sam LaPorta, the second round tight end for the Detroit Lions. Now, Sam LaPorta has arguably been the most impressive rookie of all the rookies in the 2023 class. He's been a legit vertical threat for the Detroit Lions offense with very natural hands and a very smooth, fluid route tree that continues to help him create separation and continues to help him thrive throughout mandatory mini camps and OTAs. Now, he is taking most of the second team reps, right? Sam LaPorta has worked a little bit with the first team, but it's been more of a rotational thing with James Mitchell and Brock Wright getting more tight end one roles than Sam LaPorta has received so far throughout OTAs and minicamp. However, Sam LaPorta has gotten some work with Jared Goff. He has built a little bit of chemistry with Jared Goff, and that chemistry is coming along very quickly, quicker than guys even like Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown in his rookie season. Sam LaPorta has put in a lot of work for his receiving ability, and despite not having the biggest numbers last year at Iowa, he is one of the best vertical threats and one of the best yak threats in the entirety of the NCAA, and I believe could be a top 10 receiving threat tight end in the entire NFL as early as his rookie season. Now, again, he's working mostly with the second team, meaning he's working mostly against second string defensive backs, but it is really hard to deny the route running ability. It's really hard to deny the hands, and it's very hard to deny the vertical aspect that he's bringing to the Detroit Lions offense. Now, sticking with the second round pick, Brian Branch had a very slow start to OTAs, had a very slow start to rookie minicamp, and really didn't get on the field until the first couple of days of minicamp and maybe very last days of OTA practices. However, once he got on the field, it was very apparent why Brian Branch should have been a first-round pick. His instincts were on full display, showing off massive pass breakups, showing off the versatility, showing off even the closing speed that was kind of a problem for him throughout the pre-draft process. And again, like Jack Campbell, like Sam LaPorta, he is working mostly with the second string defense, meaning he's working against the backup quarterback. He's working against slower wide receivers. He's working against wide receivers that aren't quite Amon-Ra St. Brown caliber of route running, but he has been a very good player on that second string. Again, playing multiple roles, including deep safety, slot cornerback, as well as a little bit of linebacker, and thriving at all three positions. We talked about through rookie minicamp how he was sitting out with a little bit of a nagging injury and learning a lot of different positions, and now we're starting to see the role that the Lions could potentially have for him, not just being a deep safety, not just being a slot cornerback, but even playing a little bit of linebacker, as I said, and kind of being the Swiss Army knife on the Detroit Lions defense that can play every single role on the defensive side of the ball. And when you line him up, you never know if he's going to be blitzing, if he's going to be dropping, if he's going to be in man coverage or zone coverage, or just kind of be running around making plays. And there's a lot of things that Brian Branch can do for this defense once he gets healthy and once he gets on the field. And even though he had a very slow start throughout minicamp, he was very, very productive and looked to be the first round pick many projected him to be in the 2023 NFL draft. Then moving on to third round pick, Hendon Hooker. Obviously, there's not a whole lot about Hendon Hooker, right? He's learning, he is staying involved, but unfortunately, up until yesterday, he hasn't been able to physically practice. With that being said, though, he did make his first throws as a quarterback since his ACL tear last October, yesterday after mandatory minicamp. He had a couple throws that were recorded after the last day of minicamp where he was throwing to Trinity Benson just kind of off to the side after practice. He was being covered by one of the strength and conditioning coaches, and it wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't a scramble drill. It wasn't some massive bomb. It was only a 15-20 yard pass, but Hendon Hooker did throw a nice spiral and looked like a pretty well-placed football for a player that's throwing his first passes in several months, right? Hendon Hooker hasn't thrown a football since last October when he tore his ACL, and he's finally starting to get back to that with one more OTA practice to go, or one more week of OTA practices to go before we even get to training camp in the preseason. It's been a long road to recovery for Hendon Hooker, but he is starting to show signs of improvement and is starting to show signs of getting back on the field and potentially being ready to at least somewhat practice throughout training camp in the final week of OTA. So it's a very encouraging sign to see him starting to throw the football again. And for a player that his whole thing is the deep ball, his whole thing is the accuracy and the playmaking ability, seeing him kind of get back on the field and starting to show a little bit of accuracy and power again is a very encouraging sign for the third-round quarterback from Tennessee. Now, sticking in the third round, the Detroit Lions selected Broderick Martin, the 6'4", 325-pound nose tackle from Western Kentucky. And throughout minicamp and OTAs, he has shown exactly that. The size, the explosiveness, and the athleticism at that size, as well as a sneaky amount of pass rushing ability that he didn't quite show at Western Kentucky. Now, like the rest of these rookies, he has been practicing mostly with the second and third string defenses and does have a little bit of trouble with his pad level, right? It's been known that Broderick Martin, with the size that he has, does get pushed back a little bit, right? He does play a little bit high at times, being such a big football player. So he does need to work on the pad level, does need to work on staying low, but he has shown the size, he's shown the explosiveness, he's shown some pass rushing ability. And for a third round developmental rookie who is projected to be a very one-dimensional player, he's shown a couple aspects of his game that we didn't really see on tape and is a really, really encouraging sign to have. Now, moving on to the fifth round, Colby Swordsdale, a player that we haven't talked about much as the offensive line hasn't done very much. However, Colby Swordsdale has been one of the quieter stars of minicamp and has found a lot of early success. He did change positions from right tackle to right guard, but was a very natural switch and looks very natural at his new position. Now, he's currently working with the second team offensive line, as very obviously he's not going to start over Halapaloe Vaitai, nor is he going to start over Graham Glasgow, but he could potentially be a developmental starter for that right guard position. And offensive line coach Hank Fairley has already said how impressed he is with Colby Swordsdale, how fluid, how naturally he looks at the new position, and just in general, how good he looks at the right guard position after playing right tackle for his entire collegiate career. Now, taking a look at the last player drafted by the Detroit Lions in 2023, Antoine Green is another player we haven't talked about much, right? The 5th, 6th, 7th wide receivers on the roster very rarely ever get camera time and very rarely ever get articles written about them. However, Antoine Green has been deceptively very good at minicamp and OTAs, right? Despite not having the big stories, he's had some early success, has shown the ability to be a downfield threat, is developing really good chemistry with both Nate Sudfeld as well as Adrian Martinez. And although he's working with the second strings, although he's working with the third string offenses, he has shown the ability to be a very good developmental wide receiver, as well as just a player that can be relied upon as a deep threat for the second team, as well as being kind of that safety security blanket for Adrian Martinez in the third string offense. Now, the draft picks are not the only players that are making a good impression, as the Lions had a very strong UDFA, and despite these not being the only players I think having a chance to make the roster, these are the 6 players that are really starting to stand out throughout minicamp and really starting to separate themselves from the rest of their UDFA teammates. Now, I want to start off with Starling Thomas, a player that was one of the prized possessions of UDFA for Detroit Lions fans, a player that has 4.3 speed out of UAB, a cornerback with good ball skills, is scrappy, and although he doesn't have the big turnover numbers, is a really good lockdown cornerback and doesn't allow very many yards through the air, always fights for every single football, and makes the receiver's life as difficult as can be. And although he didn't really have a lot of defensive standout performances throughout OTAs, throughout minicamp, he did have an interception in team drills, as well as being a special team standout for the Detroit Lions special team drills, and really cementing himself, I think, as a potential player for the top 53, as he is going to be a standout special teams player, as well as having the ability to make plays through the air on the defensive side of the ball. Now, Stephen Gilmore is a cornerback from Marshall that isn't talked about at all as a Detroit Lions UDFA. Is a player that was really good in college, was really good at Marshall, and really hasn't been talked about ever since signing his UDAF contract with the Detroit Lions. Now, on the last day and the last 2 days even of mandatory minicamp, Stephen Gilmore was phenomenal. He had a one-on-one pass breakup versus Amon-Ra St. Brown on the goal line and a gotta-have-it situation, and even being put up against the best route runner on the team, being put up against the best receiver, and even the best offensive weapon on the team, Stephen Gilmore stepped up to the challenge and actually won the battle versus a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. And I think, again, like Starling Thomas, has a really good opportunity to be not a starting cornerback necessarily in year one, but be a developmental cornerback, be a young cornerback that has the tools to develop into a starting player and eventually get to that spot. Now, Brandon Joseph is another member of the UDFA secondary, a safety from Notre Dame, whose whole thing in college was turning the football over. His whole thing in college and his whole thing throughout the draft process was taking the football away through the air. Now, throughout team drills, Brandon Joseph has been solid. He's been up and down, had some plays where he's been beat, but had some plays where he's been really sticky in coverage and had some really good reps, and finally came away with his first interception at minicamp on the second day of practices, picking off Nate Sudfeld in the second team offense in the end zone for a big play on the defensive side of the ball. I think, again, despite the safety room being very, very crowded, I think that Brandon Joseph has a chance to make this roster, as he is a really good coverage safety and could be a really good depth player, either on the 53 or potentially one of those practice squad players that you protect and bring up every single weekend. Now, Muhammad Ibrahim is a player we haven't really talked about since rookie minicamp in the first couple of days of OTAs. Really, since Jamir Gibbs' has returned, we haven't talked much about him, but he has been a consistent threat at the RB3 role and has been a player that is pushing Craig Reynolds for that third running back spot. And I do think it was very important to mention him. Now, we've talked about some of the young wide receivers, right? We've talked a lot about Antoine Green. We've talked about some of the other young wide receivers today. And the one player that's kind of getting them the football all of a sudden is Adrian Martinez, the undrafted free agent quarterback from Kansas State, a player that the Lions have had their eyes on for a very long time, is starting to really find himself in the NFL, right? Building a really good connection with Antoine Green, building a really good connection with Dylan Drummond, and becoming a quarterback that is not only a dual threat, but is showing some really good quarterbacking ability, some really good ability to read the field and deliver the football. And I think he has a really good opportunity to make this roster. Now, again, I think it's going to come down to how well he plays in the preseason, how well he plays when active, players are pass rushing him, how well he plays when the pressure's actually on. But I think he has a very clear-cut shot at the final 53 and potentially even being QB2 while playing really well throughout mandatory minicamp. And then one of the other players that he has been giving the football to has been Dylan Drummond. The undrafted free agent from Eastern Michigan has been nothing short of impressive in his time in Detroit. A player that was invited to rookie minicamp without a contract, a player that outperformed several other players that have been given contracts immediately, and a player that's already climbing the depth chart, already beating out Chase Cota, already beating out the other UDFA wide receiver that they signed a bonus to, and really already being a standout player throughout OTA's rookie minicamp as well as mandatory minicamp. He's been a player that isn't the biggest, isn't the fastest, isn't the strongest, but a player that continues to create separation, a player that continues to run routes and get open and catch the football consistently, and a player that just overall has been a very impressive member of the Lions UDFA class. So with all that being said, that is all the rookies that I wanted to talk about. Those are the rookies that have been standing out. Those are the draft class, and that is how the Detroit Lions 2023 rookie class is shaping up right now. Now, with all that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you go down below and subscribe to the channel as well as like the video. Helps the channel out a ton, and if you hit the bell notifications, you will never miss a Detroit Lions upload. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, what rookies are you excited to hear about? What rookies are you excited to see on the field as the preseason approaches? And what players in UDFA do you think will actually end up making the roster? And which ones do you think will stick with the practice squad? I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.